Hello, I'm Donald Macaulay and welcome to medicsvoices.com, where we talk to the key opinion leaders in health and medicine around the world. Today we're in Germany and I'm talking to Norbert Donner-Banzhoff. Now, let's start first of all, because many of our listeners may not understand the system of general practice primary care in Germany. Tell me how it works.
Well, there are family doctors in primary care in Germany, but primary care is being provided by a whole bunch of different providers. So it's family doctors. There are also general internists. And the peculiar thing in Germany is that patients have access to community-based specialists as well. So in other words, there is no formal gatekeeping system. Patients can opt for a voluntary gatekeeping system, so they choose their family doctor, and the family doctor is providing primary care, and they access other providers only on the basis of a referral, but this is still a minority. And so that's an entirely different situation to other countries or other healthcare systems where GPs have, well, economically speaking, they have a monopoly on primary care. This in Germany is not the case, and that's our problem actually, because we are competing with specialists. That's one problem. The other problem is fragmentation of care. So the flow of information, of documentation, of clinical information, all this is very difficult. So you can use Germany as a bad example if in other countries an end of GP gatekeeping is being discussed. I don't know whether that is the case anywhere in the world, but if it happens, people can come over and see what the results are. Now, I'm very negative. There are also very positive things, and that is we have made immense progress over the last 20, 25 years establishing family medicine in Germany. So when I started, there were perhaps 1.5 academic departments producing some internationally visible results, and now practically every medical school in Germany has its primary care department. And I would say 1.5 they are visible on an international level. So we have made plenty of progress. So that's the good news. But the lack of a gatekeeping system, that is perhaps the main difference to systems that you find predominantly in journals, primary care journals, because the more general practice has a gatekeeping system, the more or the easier it is for teaching. It is easier to do research and to publish your research. All this is easier. It comes easier if gatekeeping and population registration and kind of unify or standardized patient records are established.
Now, you wrote some years ago that it was difficult to attract doctors to family medicine. Is that still the case?
Well, it's difficult for any discipline in this country. The difficulty is attracting young doctors to clinical medicine. So it's not just general practice, not just primary care. In this regard, actually, we have made a lot of progress because medical students now experience teachers in general practice, and that's kind of boosting the motivation to go into general practice. So relatively speaking, one could maybe say that relative to other disciplines, primary care has become more popular. But overall, we have difficulties recruiting doctors into clinical disciplines, and many reasons for that, and they don't differ so much between countries because other countries have similar problems really. So the reasons are probably more or less the same. With one difference, we train many more doctors than UK, for instance, per population. We train larger numbers, but we have a lot of waste in our system. So, and for a wasteful system, well, now I'm getting a bit ironical. For a wasteful system, you need plenty of doctors.
Now let's move on to your own career, because you've covered a whole range of aspects of general practice family medicine, but your main interest appears to be diagnosis. Tell me about your interest in diagnosis.
Well, that's actually, it has to do with my international experience. As a medical student, I went to the UK for a year, and well, this was my girlfriend then. She learned, she had found out, well, medical training is much better in the UK than in Germany. Let's go to the UK. So I went with her to the UK, and this was a life-changing thing. This was actually in South Wales, in Swansea. Before Swansea had a medical school, this was an arrangement by the German Academic Exchange Service. So I was one of the very first medical students in Swansea before the official medical school started. And I had two attachments with general practice. And this impression was just overwhelming, so I decided, oh, general practice is the thing to do for the rest of your life. And diagnosis came in because I discovered that diagnostic thinking and acting is different in British doctors than in continental European ones. For instance, the ward rounds in cardiology at the hospital, I remember a patient with chest pain, and the group of white coats around the bed discussed the quality of his and the location and the fairness of his chest pain for 10 minutes or so. This has never happened in any German hospital at all, and continental European hospital. And oh, I said, this is interesting. And they are doing this completely different. And I was very fascinated by, oh gosh, they are listening to the patient. They're drawing conclusions from what patients say. They're not just ordering the tests, but they make use of the history and the physical examination. I found that very, very fascinating. And by noticing the difference, the thing becomes interesting. You question what you have done until that point, or what your teachers have told you. And so from that on, my interest in diagnosis started, and by some strange coincidences, I ended up in academic at the university. And so I had plenty of opportunity to take these thoughts, these ideas further.
Now, you've written a book which is a very comprehensive exploration of diagnosis, and I was fascinated by some aspects. One was your description that in the scientific context, patients have a disease, but in practice, patients come with an illness. That's a big difference.
Well, that's a big difference, although, Donner, I must admit, I have not discovered the difference between the two. That wise people have done that before. But this is, of course, a fundamental distinction. The illness I have on my way to the doctors, and the disease, that's what I take home. And what is important here is that our idea, or our categorization, or what we formulate in terms of disease, is always only a preliminary thing, an hypothesis, and which is which is being tested all the time. And I think that's why GPs are so modest people, because they test their hypothesis all the time. We realize how often we have to reject what we have formulated the last time. And our hospital colleagues, they are so lucky. They don't have this kind of test. So they are, for that reason, they are much more self-confident and perhaps, yeah, whether they are more happy than we are, I don't know. That's a tricky question. But the modesty reality is teaching us. That's the important thing. And the book, I think, what is new or unusual, I should perhaps say, that I bring to, or try to bring together the diagnostic task we have, all the instruments that you find in your book on clinical epidemiology as well. But on the other hand, to reflect the symbolic transactions we are always involved in. And here medicine is very, very old-fashioned. It's an archetypical, archaic activity. And whether what we do, what we say, what we investigate, whether that has any objective biomedical relevance doesn't matter at all at this level. And this symbolic level is there all the time with any healing person, any healing profession in the world, be that at an academic tertiary care center or in my practice, it doesn't matter. It is always there. We can't abolish it, and we should not abolish it. We should use it. And that's a big responsibility. But I've developed a model that consists of 4 layers, and these layers, they can be linked to certain stages of the history of medicine and healthcare. And at the bottom, you have this archetypical healer, and this tectonic level is always existing. And in modern times, we are a bit ashamed of this. We are trying to ignore or oppress it. But we shouldn't. We should realize, well, this is our role. These are the effects that we have. And there I have developed a kind of how you can navigate these contradictions, that these different layers and the roles they are linked to, all these contradictions that we are struggling with in our everyday care, how you can manage those so that your patients are happy, that doctors are happy, and the healthcare system is happy, so that everybody's happy. That's the idea.
You have a line that caught my imagination, which is somewhere along this role between this healer and the scientist. And that is that X-rays and injections are powerful rituals.
Yes, that's actually what this archetypical healer does. He or she is not so much working with words or being effective at that level, but by symbolic action. And I think we, in German, on the continent maybe in general, we are a bit more superstitious. So we use many more things such as injections for musculoskeletal pain that's still used by many elderly GPs. And it's as a modern guideline on low back pain, you can't just say leave that out, don't do it, because that's tricky. Patients will ask and doctors will ask, well, what can I do instead? So if I don't give injections anymore, there's a vacuum. I have to develop completely new strategies to fill that vacuum. And that takes a long time, but I'm optimistic in this regard. I think the change we have brought into medical teaching in this country, I mean general practice, primary care, I think that's gradually changing, improving things, that people become more critical, but We never get rid of our role, our task as the archetypical healer. It is always there. And inviting to be misused, but that, of course, we should not do, but we should reflect on it.
Now let's move on to a little bit of your work on decision making and the ARIBA. Talk to me about ARIBA.
Yes, that's our family of decision aids we have developed for general practice, and that story started, I think, 16 years or so, and what perhaps the nicest thing or the most impressive thing is the visual makeup of these decision aids. So we have so it's a very nice presentation of quantitative, of numbers, of risks, of benefits, and also of harms. And that has become very popular in our country. So a few weeks ago, there was a popular quiz on TV, and we have made it to this kind of quiz. So the question was, what is ARIBA? And the alternatives were a system to calculate the acoustics of a room for architects, and the other was the detection of turbulences on intercontinental flights. And of course, these were wrong, and our ARIBA was right. So we are kind of gaining in popularity.
Now, I had a conference this time last year, and in the introduction to the conference, there was a statement that seemed to me interesting, controversial, challenging, and that was the concept of shared decision making, which we all accept. But the question was, is this an abrogation of responsibility? Is this a facet of neoliberalism where we're passing on the responsibility to the patient? That's quite challenging.
Yes, it's shared decision making. The term touches on a very, very complex reality, and of course, what you alluded to, it is there. It's so SDM can mean leaving the patient alone. I find that too difficult. Dear patient, I leave that to you, and I will do what you want, but the decision, you have to make it. So there's always the risk. That's why we call it shared. We don't well, the other philosophy that's usually called the consumer's perspective, and that's the consumer is the sovereign. He or she can decide on her own, is free to choose. But that's why we call it shared. That I just don't present information, but I also try to find out what the patient's values are. And I don't start de novo. I know my patient, perhaps for years or even decades. So I have a certain idea what he or she would favor in terms of values and also in terms of which way to go. So shared means that we not just sharing the present discussion, but also what we have had together in the past. We have this very nice term of erlebte Anamnese. That's a shared history doctor and patient have sometimes for a long time. And at this level, shared decision making is completely different than a computerized decision aid presented by an insurance company. The latter, that's fine, that should be done, and patients like to have some resources on their own. But our ARIBA family of decision aids, that's always to be used in the consultation. So always together with doctor and patient communicating about what is the topic here. And and that's different to many other decision aids. The majority of them are for patients or consumers or citizens to go through on their own. but Ariba, that is being used only during the consultation. Of course, the patient gets a printout to think about it at home, but it is consultation-based.
Now, my final question is, because of my links with the Canadian Medical Association Journal, is about a paper you published in CMAG about 10, 12, 15 years ago, about the potential bias in the free medical journals.
And yes, this is really a problem. So there are medical journals you subscribe to, and there are others you get for free. Many colleagues say, well, we don't have to subscribe to anything. We get them for free, and they are so nice and so easy. And so we have decided, well, let's look at it in a systematic way. And we have, that was about a dozen journals regularly read by GPs, and we have divided them in 3 groups. One was completely dependent on advertising, drug companies mainly, and another group subscription only, and there was an intermediate group. So this was the exposure variable. And on the other hand, we looked at articles, so not ads, but articles covering recently marketed drugs. And by a blinded observer, we quantified the tendency, the pro or contra tendency, and we found that journals being dependent on advertising, they had a different tendency in their articles. So being dependent on advertising, that corrupts the paper, and that people should know. I think people are becoming more critical, and there are alternatives to subscribe to, and nowadays these journals are predominantly digital, but the problem remains the same. So you have to make clear what is your source and what does your source of information financially depend on.
It seems terrible to have brought the commercial aspect into a wonderful conversation that we had about diagnosis. Norbert, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I'm absolutely fascinated by your interest in diagnosis, which ranges really right across the whole philosophy of diagnosis and what we do in general practice. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed.
And you, thank you very much.